it work?
I believe she did 80 different theater productions. That's an incredible experience and emphasis on acting and technique.
They gave Meryl most of the leads, and it was, of course, wonderfully flattering, but she started to get exhausted. I think at one point she had to go and say, please leave me out of one play, would you?
In fact, Meryl's intense production schedule left her with an ulcer. It was one of the few things she brought with her when she moved to New York in the spring of 1975. She was almost 27 years old.
There have been hundreds of thousands of actors, at a minimum, who have come to New York in their mid-20s, and the truth is that we haven't heard of most of them.
Today, at 27 years old, you're finished. It's like, what? You know, are you going to play mothers?
Meryl's Yale connections got her cast in small off-Broadway plays. But when it came to impressing the New York theater scene's movers and shakers, Meryl had a bumpy ride. When she booked an important audition with the Public Theater's Joe Papp, she did the same thing she did when she applied to law school. She slept right through it.
I dread any kind of big test where it all matters on that one moment, you know.
Meryl had to beg Papp's casting director for another chance, and she made the most of it. Papp ultimately cast her in Measure for Measure, one of the earliest productions of New York's now legendary Shakespeare in the Park.
I first saw her in Measure for Measure in 1976, and she blew me away. She was very funny, she was very bawdy. I mean, you just couldn't take your eyes off of her.
Meryl's co-star in Measure for Measure was John Cazale, who was already famous for playing Fredo in the Godfather films and Al Pacino's sidekick in Dog Day Afternoon.
Here's Meryl Streep coming out of Vassar and Yale and meeting somebody who has these same feelings about what acting is. That's the connection that they had.
You can only imagine how romantic that must have been. These two actors meeting each other, doing theater outdoors in New York City in the summer. They went head over heels for each other.
By the time Measure for Measure finished its run, Meryl and John were engaged.
You wouldn't necessarily look at these two and think those two are going to be a couple. Meryl Streep was ravishing at that point. She was 27 years old. John Cazale was pushing 40. Not a conventionally handsome man, but there was some chemistry between them. There were some sparks on stage and off stage.
But in less than 18 months, their love affair would come to a heartbreaking end. It's a story that even many close to Meryl have never heard.
Meryl said she was shocked. I think she was too close to it. She didn't expect it.
By the summer of 1976, Meryl Streep, thanks in part to her starring role in Shakespeare in the Park's Measure for Measure, had taken New York theater by storm. That fall, she made the jump to the big screen when she was cast in a small part in the Vanessa Redgrave Jane Fonda blockbuster, Julia.
Jane Fonda, Vanessa Redgrave, and Meryl Streep in a bit part where she basically appears in one scene and says very little. And yet, you watch her. You've always had that thing about Meryl that you watch her.
One of the people who noticed Meryl was New York's most famous director at that moment, Woody Allen, who had just completed his Oscar-winning film, Annie Hall. He immediately cast Meryl as his icy ex-wife in his next film, a love letter to New York called Manhattan. It was her first major film role, and Meryl was electrifying.
She just really came off the screen. I mean, she was a sort of repellent character in that movie, and a caricature, and she was in the movie very briefly, but boy.
She manages to be very tart and very sly and very critical of him. She really allows us to see that she had her reasons for leaving him.
She's playing an ice queen. Why was she playing an ice queen? Well, because she could. She could bloody well look like an ice queen. She has that look about her. She has that sort of high German face, you know, those cheekbones, the long, sharp nose. She can summon up arrogance very, very easily.
It was such a wonderful combination to have the warmth of Woody Allen and the coldness of Meryl Streep, the neurosis of Woody Allen and the neurosis of Meryl Streep. And it really, really made Manhattan a masterpiece.